Saturday mornings meant watching cartoons on a black and white television with rabbit ears that required constant adjustment. The antenna had aluminum foil wrapped around the tips, and someone always had to hold it just right to get a clear picture. You'd wake up early, pour a bowl of cereal with milk that came in glass bottles, and settle on the living room floor. The carpet was thick shag and avocado green or burnt orange, and it left patterns on your knees when you sat too long. Between the cartoons, you'd see commercials for toys you knew your family couldn't afford, but you watched them anyway, memorizing every detail. Church shoes were patent leather and had to be polished every Sunday morning until you could see your reflection in them. Your mother would line up all the children's shoes on newspaper spread across the kitchen table, applying kiwi shoe polish with an old rag. The smell was sharp and chemical, but it meant Sunday was coming. Those shoes pinched your feet and made walking on the church's marble floors sound like tap dancing. You learned to walk carefully, quietly, because the last thing you wanted was to draw attention during the pastor's sermon. The corner barbershop was where men gathered to talk about everything except what was really bothering them. Mr. Johnson ran the place with 3 chairs that were always occupied on Saturday afternoons. The floor was covered in black and gray hair, swept into small piles that somehow never seemed to disappear completely. Hot combs and pressing oil created a distinctive smell that mixed with aftershave and the pomade the men used in their hair. You sat in the waiting chairs, listening to conversations about work, sports, and politics, learning what it meant to be a man in America. Freeze pops from the ice cream truck cost a quarter and came in flavors that turned your tongue unnatural colors. The truck played the same melody over and over, a tinkling song that could be heard 3 blocks away. Children would drop whatever they were doing and run toward the sound, clutching sweaty coins in their palms. The driver knew every kid's name and their usual order. On hot summer days, the pops melted faster than you could eat them, creating sticky rivers down your arms that attracted bees and made your mother fuss about your clothes. Sunday dinner preparations began on Saturday night with the seasoning of chicken and the soaking of beans. Your grandmother moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, her hands knowing exactly how much salt, pepper, and paprika each dish required. The cast iron skillet was seasoned so well that nothing ever stuck to it. By Sunday morning, the house already smelled like home cooking, and that smell would intensify throughout the day until the whole neighborhood knew something good was happening in your kitchen. The sound of oil popping in that skillet meant everything was right with the world. Record players sat in the center of living rooms like altars to music, with collections of 45s and LPs stacked carefully in wooden crates. The needle had to be replaced regularly, and everyone in the house learned how to handle records properly, holding them by the edges and never touching the grooves. When company came over, the music selection was as important as the food. Certain records were reserved for adults only, hidden behind the gospel albums and children's songs. The scratch and pop of a well-loved record was the sound of memories being made. Double Dutch jump rope required 3 people minimum and could entertain a group of children for hours, with nothing but 2 lengths of clothesline. The rhythm was everything, with the rope turners calling out the beat while the jumper performed increasingly complex moves. Street corners and sidewalks became stages for these performances, with neighbors stopping to watch and children lining up for their turn. The rhymes that accompanied the jumping were passed down from older children to younger ones, preserving an oral tradition that lived only in the neighborhood. Hot water was precious in houses where 6 people shared 1 bathroom, and the hot water heater was small and temperamental. Saturday night meant bath time for everyone, starting with the youngest and working up to the adults. By the time your turn came, the water might be lukewarm at best. You learned to wash quickly and efficiently, using a washcloth that had seen better days, but was still perfectly functional for scrubbing behind ears and between toes. The sound of water draining meant someone else's turn was coming. The television went off at midnight, and when it did, there was nothing but a test pattern and a high-pitched whine that filled the quiet house. Most families had only one television, and watching it was a family activity that required negotiation and compromise. The volume was kept low after 9 o'clock, and children were expected to be in bed before the good shows came on. Late night television was an adult privilege that marked the transition from childhood to something approaching maturity. Kool-Aid was made in glass pitchers with wooden spoons for stirring, and the amount of sugar added depended on how much was left in the canister. Red flavor was always the most popular, followed by grape, and the powder would stain the pitcher and your lips for days. Ice was a luxury saved for special occasions, so most of the time you drank it warm and sweet. The empty packets were saved and used for other purposes, because nothing in the house was thrown away if it might be useful later. Plastic slip covers protected the good furniture from everyday wear and stuck to your legs in the summer heat. The living room with the covered furniture was for company only, and children were not allowed to sit on those chairs and sofas unless they had been specifically invited. The plastic made crinkling sounds when anyone moved, announcing every shift and fidget to the entire room. Underneath the covers, the fabric was usually pristine, as if it had never been used at all. Penny candy required strategic planning and careful counting of coins before approaching the counter at the corner store. The glass jars lined the wall behind the register, filled with Mary Janes, Bit-O honey, and Swedish fish that cost 2 for a penny. Store owners knew every child's name and their parents, keeping track of who owed money and who could be trusted with credit until allowance day. The selection process could take 10 minutes, with each penny's worth carefully considered before being placed in the small brown bag. Hair grease came in small glass jars with metal lids that required a church key to open, and it was applied every morning before school. Blue Magic, Royal Crown, and Dax were the brands that appeared in every black household's medicine cabinet. The smell was distinctive, a mix of petroleum and perfume that lingered on pillowcases and coat collars. Your mother would work it through your hair with a fine-tooth comb, creating parts so straight they looked like they had been drawn with a ruler. School clothes were ironed every evening and laid out for the next day, because appearance mattered and represented your family's values. Permanent press was a new technology that few could afford, so everything required the hot iron and spray starch. Your mother would set up the ironing board in the kitchen after dinner, pressing school uniforms and play clothes with equal care. Wrinkled clothing was not acceptable, and children learned early that how you looked reflected on everyone who shared your last name. Pop bottles were returned to the store for the deposit, collected in wooden crates that clinked and rattled when you carried them. Coca-Cola, Orange Crush, and RC Cola bottles were worth 5 cents each, enough to buy candy or contribute toward a larger purchase. Children would search vacant lots and construction sites for discarded bottles, turning trash into treasure. The bottles were thick glass, heavy enough to hurt if dropped on a toe, and cold enough to burn your fingers when they came straight from the ice chest. Garden hoses provided relief from summer heat and entertainment that cost nothing but water pressure. Children would run through the spray in their underwear or bathing suits, shrieking with delight as the cold water hit sun-warmed skin. The hose was also a disciplinary tool, used to break up fights or redirect misbehaving children who were getting too wild. When the streetlights came on, the hose was coiled neatly and put away until the next hot day. Telephone party lines meant that your conversations might be overheard by neighbors who shared the same connection. The phone hung on the kitchen wall with a long, curly cord that allowed you to move around while talking, but privacy was limited. Important conversations were saved for times when you were sure no one else was listening. Children were taught proper telephone etiquette and were not allowed to tie up the line for social calls during dinner hours. Library books were precious resources that had to be returned on time or face fines the family could not afford. The librarian knew every child's reading level and would recommend books that challenged without overwhelming. Story time was held on Saturday mornings in a circle on the carpet, with children sitting cross-legged and listening to tales of adventure and magic. Library cards were laminated and kept in a special place, treated with the respect due to something that provided unlimited access to knowledge. Starch was mixed with water in spray bottles and applied liberally to clothing before ironing, creating crisp creases and smooth surfaces. Niagara and Argo were the brands that appeared on laundry room shelves, their blue boxes promising professional results at home. Collar tips and pocket edges received extra attention, with sharp creases that would last through a full day of wear. The smell of hot starch and cotton filled the house on laundry days, mixing with the sound of the iron gliding across the ironing board. Christmas layaway started in September at Kmart and Woolworths, with parents making small payments toward gifts they would retrieve in December. The process required discipline and planning, with each payment recorded in a small booklet kept by the store. Children might catch glimpses of their parents making these transactions, understanding that Christmas magic required months of sacrifice and careful budgeting. The anticipation built slowly, with the knowledge that something special was waiting in the back room of the department store. Medicine cabinet mirrors reflected faces illuminated by bare light bulbs screwed into ceramic sockets, and the shelves inside held remedies for every ailment: mercurochrome for cuts, Vaseline for everything else, and aspirin for headaches were the basics that every household maintained. The mirror had a tendency to swing open at the wrong moment, revealing the family's private medical concerns to anyone who happened to be looking. Children learned early which medicines were for adults only and which could be trusted to provide relief for childhood injuries. Neighborhood ice cream trucks played the same songs every day, but the magic never wore off for children who would stop whatever they were doing to flag down the driver. Bomb pops, ice cream sandwiches, and drumsticks were the favorites, though prices seemed to increase every summer. The truck moved slowly through residential streets, the driver patient with children who needed time to count their coins and make their selections. Those who had no money would follow the truck anyway, hoping someone might share or drop their purchase. Outhouse usage required planning and courage, especially on cold winter mornings when the trip to the backyard facility was an adventure in endurance. Sears catalogs provided reading material and tissue paper, their pages soft from handling and weather. The smell was distinctive and unavoidable, but families made do with what they had. Electric lighting was a luxury not always available, so flashlights and candles provided illumination after dark. Screen doors slammed shut with a distinctive bang that announced arrivals and departures to the entire neighborhood, and the springs that pulled them closed gradually lost their tension over time. The screens themselves were patched with small pieces of material that never quite matched the original, creating a patchwork of repairs that told the story of the door's long service. Children learned to close the door gently to avoid their mother's displeasure, but the temptation to let it slam was sometimes irresistible. Wringer washing machines required careful attention and strong arms to operate safely, with stories of fingers and clothing caught in the rollers serving as cautionary tales. Laundry day was an all-day affair, with clothes sorted by color and fabric type before being fed through the machine's mechanical grip. The wet clothes came out flattened and had to be shaken out before hanging on the line. Women developed techniques for efficient washing, their movements practiced and economical. Grandmother's hands told stories through every line and callus, from years of cooking, cleaning, and caring for families that stretched her resources thin, but never her love. Those hands could braid hair in perfect cornrows without looking, season food by touch alone, and provide comfort that made any hurt feel manageable. When she held your face between her palms to wipe away tears, the world felt safe again. Her hands smelled like hand lotion and flour, and watching them work in the kitchen was like witnessing magic happen in everyday motions. Funeral parlor fans were distributed at church services during sweltering summer months, providing relief and advertisement in equal measure. The cardboard fans featured pictures of Jesus or deceased community members on one side and funeral home information on the other. The sound of dozens of people fanning themselves created a gentle rustling that mixed with the preacher's voice and the choir's humming. Children learned to wave the fans quietly, understanding that making noise during service meant trouble later. Those fans found their way into kitchen drawers and stayed there for years. Banana pudding was made from scratch in glass bowls that showed off the layers of vanilla wafers, custard, and meringue that crowned the top. Your aunt made it for every family gathering, using a recipe that existed only in her memory and her hand's knowledge of texture and taste. The meringue would brown perfectly in the oven, and children would beg for the bowl to lick clean when the pudding was gone. The taste was pure comfort, sweet and creamy, with the crunch of cookies that had softened just enough in the custard. Hand-me-down clothes were altered by mothers who could make a boy's shirt fit a girl with careful stitching and creativity. Nothing was thrown away if it could be mended, hemmed, or transformed into something useful. Your mother's sewing basket was filled with buttons saved from worn-out garments, scraps of fabric that might become patches, and thread in colors that represented years of repairs and alterations. The sound of the sewing machine running late into the night meant someone was getting something new to wear, even if it had been something else before. Evening prayers were said kneeling beside beds, with children reciting words they had memorized before they understood their meaning. The ritual was comforting in its sameness, a daily acknowledgement that forces beyond the family's control influenced their lives and deserved respect. Parents listened from doorways, making sure the prayers were said properly and completely. The act of kneeling on cold linoleum floors was part of the discipline, a physical reminder that some things required discomfort and submission. Collard greens simmered on the stove all day Sunday, filling the house with the smell of smoked meat and bitter leaves that would transform into something delicious through patience and tradition. Your grandmother would add ham hocks or neck bones to the pot, creating a broth that was the foundation of the dish. The greens had to be washed multiple times, each leaf inspected for insects or dirt before being chopped and added to the pot. By evening, they would be tender and full of flavor, a side dish that was really the main event. Front porch sitting was an evening ritual that brought neighbors together without formal invitation or planned activities. Adults would gather after dinner to watch children play and discuss the day's events while the heat slowly dissipated from concrete and asphalt. The conversations were unhurried, covering everything from work troubles to community news, with long pauses that felt comfortable rather than awkward. Children played in yards that belonged to everyone and no one, their laughter mixing with adult voices in a symphony of neighborhood life. Milk was delivered in glass bottles that sat in metal boxes on front porches, with the cream rising to the top and forming a thick layer that some families would skim off for coffee or desserts. The milkman knew each family's weekly order and would collect empty bottles while leaving full ones, a system that required trust and reliability on both sides. On hot days, the milk could sour quickly, turning into cottage cheese that would be used for cooking rather than wasted. The sound of bottles clinking early in the morning meant fresh milk was waiting. Brown paper bags were lunch containers that served multiple purposes, from carrying food to school to holding small treasures that children collected throughout the day. Your mother would pack sandwiches wrapped in wax paper along with an apple and maybe a small bag of chips if money allowed. The bags were reused until they fell apart, serving as book covers, storage for small items, and eventually kindling for the fireplace. Lunch was usually simple, but it was prepared with care and the understanding that it might be the best meal of the day. Wood-burning stoves heated entire houses with logs that had to be split, stacked, and carefully tended to keep the fire burning safely. The responsibility for maintaining the fire often fell to the oldest children, who learned to judge when more wood was needed and how to bank the coals for overnight warmth. The heat was direct and comforting, but it required constant attention and respect for the power of fire. On cold mornings, the house would be freezing everywhere except near the stove, and getting dressed meant running from the warm spot to the cold bedroom and back again. Which of these memories brings you right back to your childhood kitchen, hearing your grandmother's voice calling you to come eat?